Hi again guys, and welcome to the second specific review, of course, from the 1.29 selection of vehicles. First of all, looking at the Zonda R yesterday, now looking at my favourite car of the pack, easily, the Maserati Granturismo S. I know some people were disappointed. I mean, some people are always disappointed by the cars that we get, but some people were disappointed that this was the same Maserati that we had before, rather than, for instance, the more recent facelifted version, or something like an MC Stradale, or even an MC GT4, or perhaps something completely different entirely, like a Ghibli or a Levante, or even, of course, my personal favourite Maserati, the MC12. Now, of course, I would be very happy with all of those, but I'm not at all surprised that it's this one that they chose to bring back, especially since we've had a clear precedent so far for them bringing these, you could say, super premium cars in some cases, like the Nismo GTR, back to the game, because they already looked really good in GT6 on the previous console, so updating them is undoubtedly easier than starting a new vehicle from scratch. And even if you're talking about a facelifted version compared to this one, that would still be, in effect, for the majority of which, a new car to map into the game, whereas this one is more of an update of an existing car. You could view that as disappointing, of course, especially given that the game's been out for more than a year, but that's a conversation for another time. We've discussed stuff like that in Beards and Cars numerous times and will continue to do so. But as far as this car specifically, since this is what we have, so this is what we've got to work with, I'm very happy with it, because for one thing, I love the Maserati brand anyway, and I was hoping that they'd bring them back, but I wasn't sure that they would. There were a couple of vehicles, including this one, that I hoped they would bring back to Gran Turismo in GT Sport, but I wasn't sure whether or not they'd get around to it. And since Maserati doesn't have a massive presence in the franchise overall anyway, again, I wasn't sure that they would. Stuff like the Alfa Romeo 8C is a car that I would often discuss in a similar kind of sentence, if you will, to this one, because it's a car that's really nice, it's really cool, it's stunning to look at, but it wasn't the most popular thing around, wasn't the most useful thing around, so will they bring it back? We'll have to wait and see. Now, in many ways, of course, this is going to be the same as the previous game. Even the price is very similar, 167,000 credits, but I actually think that's really good, because you're talking essentially like Mercedes AMG or Aston Martin kind of prices, but for a car which is at least as good as many of those options. Now, you cannot detune this one to N300, which is maybe a little disappointing. It would have been cool to use it for that, but N400 and above is certainly not bad. Now, the car sits right on the peak of N400 to begin with, so you cannot upgrade the power if you want the car to stay in N400. As soon as you bump it up, you go straight into N500. Now, you can tune it way up, far higher. Of course, in my overall review for the pack, I took it around Le Mans, went over 200 miles per hour pretty easily. If I recall, I think that was the standard transmission as well. You can tune it up to close to 700 horsepower, so similar to GT6, but again, not quite as powerful. Surprise, surprise there, many cars aren't. And in terms of weight, that was always kind of the issue with this Maserati. It's a very heavy car, it weighs 1,780 kilos, and given that it is, of course, more of a luxury GT style exotic, or a SuperSports car, it's not too surprising that it is a little bit heavier. Again, Mercedes, Jag, Aston, Bentley, that kind of territory. Now, of course, as such, it doesn't necessarily lend itself toward being as much of a track car. Something like a BMW M6 would also be a great rival, and again, big, heavy car. Not the greatest cornering machine, but great in a straight line, very comfortable, very luxurious. The problem being, the game isn't about luxury. And it doesn't matter how comfortable the car is, because you're not sitting in it. So, of course, track performance tends to be what it's all about. Which, again, brings up, why would you bring this car back to the game? And various others like a Samba Bass, or you could even say like a Veyron, for instance. They're not cornering machines, which kind of blurs the line, because the cars included in GT Sport are very different to what the purpose of the game itself has been presented as. They don't really match up that well. However, they are good for a Gran Turismo game. The kind of variation of the cars, for instance, trucks, sedans, muscle cars, supercars, that kind of mixture is what we would always want. So we do still have that to some degree. Now, as far as what this one is capable of, it was never the quickest of track cars anyway. In fact, back when this car was first released in the real world, when Top Gear reviewed it, they didn't think it was as special as you'd expect or hope for from a Maserati. They thought it was nice and good, but not mind-blowing. And for the most part, I can understand that mentality. That's kind of the way it is in the game as well. It's not amazing, even in Forza. It's not a phenomenal car. It tends to be one of the more overlooked Maseratis because it sort of falls in the middle ground. It's expensive compared to some supercars or super sports cars, but it doesn't necessarily have the kind of performance of something like a GTR, even though it's close to double the price in some cases. So if you're looking purely for value, well, you'd probably be better off going to something like a Corvette or a Viper or a GTR because they're so much cheaper and do offer, for the most part, more at least straight line performance, if not cornering as well, in the case of something like a GTR. But of course, it's a Maserati, so it's not really about that. It's just like Panos, it's like Pagani, it's like Spiker, many other brands that I also love where they're not trying to be necessarily the quickest thing around, they're just the less expected choice. They're the more oddball choice, the more elegant, the more almost gothic, you could say, choice. And Maserati is definitely a gothic looking brand. It's one of the reasons why I love them. So for me, I love the fact that you can use this in Blue Moon Bay. I love the fact that it actually makes a really good track car compared to in GT6, because again, this is one occasion where the N classes I think actually do benefit the car instead of performance points. Because back in GT6, you could tune it up to over 700 horsepower, which sounds very cool. You could tune up the bodywork, give it a flat floor, which made the PP points even higher again. Sounds cool on paper. You could get it to do about 240, 250 miles per hour. Again, sounds very good. But then the problem was, its performance points were up there with stuff like race cars and supercars, and it just can't compete against many of those because of its weight, because of its cornering ability or lack thereof compared to some. Not that it's a bad handling car, it just feels every bit as heavy as it is. So now I think it's actually in a much better position, ironically, despite the fact that there's less visual tuning, less upgrade tuning, and lower power compared to what you could get before. It feels, contrary to all of those negatives, a more positive scenario, I think, for the Maserati, because you're up against cars which it actually feels like it should be up against, like the Vantage, the F-Type, the AMG GT, these cars which actually are rivals for it, not just sticking it up against stuff like GTRs and the ones that I mentioned, Corvettes and Vipers, purely for the sake of doing so. Will it go up against them? Yeah, 9 times out of 10 it probably will, depending on balance of performance and class, but the point is that now it feels like it has more of a fighting chance. Which does of course say something about the natural ability of the car, that you have to have a different system for it to feel more capable, but again, it's not trying to be the most capable thing around. Maserati has always been the choice for people like me and like many of you guys who want to drive something less obvious. It's not a Ferrari, it's not a Lamborghini, and it's not trying to be. I love them for that. Some people won't. I can understand why some people wouldn't be into Maseratis. They're certainly not the most affordable or even the best value or the highest bang for buck. But if you are a Maserati fan, if you are a Gran Turismo fan, talking about the car, of course, not the game, then I don't think you'll be disappointed in the slightest, because it looks good, it sounds good, the handling is every bit as good as you'd hope it would be, given the weight, and the performance, although not earth-shattering, is definitely more than capable enough to bring the heat against Mercedes, Aston, Jaguar, various others too. And that's exactly how it should be, because that's the kind of car that it is. So overall, I'm very happy with this one, easily my favourite from the pack. It's not the quickest of the pack, of course, but the fact that it's even more useful than something like the Zonda R from yesterday is a completely different scenario and an utter role reversal compared to what it was in GT6. But overall, I'm very happy with it. Of course, check out my tune for this car earlier on today to earn lots of money with it. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.